everybody, it's Helen Hillix, intuitive counselor and licensed therapist, and your host for Sacred Sexuality Revealed, Secrets of Passionate Intimacy, Deeper Connections, and Lasting Desire. And I have the real honor today of interviewing Barbara Carrellas from Urban Tantra, who is just a mind-blowingly smart and integrated speaker, coach. I'll tell you a little bit more about her later, but I'm really, really honored to have her here today. And let me tell you just a couple of sentences about why I'm doing this summit. Two reasons, really. One is that I had my own painful sexual history back in the 1960s and 70s, and what you think of, I'm sure, as the dark ages. But the sexual revolution was going on, and you were really, all the young people were promiscuous and having sex, casual sex, and I had abortions and abusive situations, and it left me, rather than feeling liberated, which I wish it had left me feeling, I felt shame, and it took a lot of time and a lot of work on myself to find sacred sexuality and truly feel liberated, and I don't want you to have to go through that same thing. And I've been a therapist for 35 years, and I've seen countless clients, individuals, couples, everywhere on the gender spectrum and every sexual preference. And it doesn't matter. We all have the same desire to connect and be intimate, and we aren't taught how. So I feel a real passion to try to make a difference in the area of sacred sexuality and how to be intimate with people and to liberate ourselves from all those limiting beliefs and, shame thoughts and so forth that our culture has, I use the word, perpetrated on us. So I'm excited today to talk to Barbara and really dive into this topic with her. And I know you guys are going to just love her. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Barbara is the founder of Urban Tantra, an approach to conscious sexuality that adapts and blends a wide variety of sacred sexuality practices from Tantra to BDSM. She is the author of Urban Tantra, Sacred Sex for the 21st Century, now in its second edition. Ecstasy is Necessary, a practical guide to sex, relationships, and oh so much more, and Luxurious Loving. Her books, workshops, and lectures are an eclectic mix of sexual and spiritual practices designed to encourage readers and participants of all genders and sexual preferences to expand their capacity for both pleasure and spiritual fulfillment. So I am just over the moon to have you here today, Barbara. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I would love to start out with the question that I ask everybody, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about it, which is, how do you define sacred sexuality?
Sacred to me is a way of holding something. It's what sacred looks like in practice depends on who's practicing and what their traditions are. For people who have trouble with the word sacred because they come from a religious tradition that they've since rejected, I use the word conscious, because conscious to me simply means putting your attention on your intention, and there's another key piece, intention. Practicing conscious or sacred sexuality requires an intention. It can be pretty much anything, but it requires a presence, a mindfulness, a realization that when you drop into this space of conscious or sacred sexuality, that you're connecting to something bigger than the you customarily think of yourself as. For example, you may be connecting to a deeper part of yourself than you usually relate to, or you might be connecting more deeply to another or to others. And ultimately, it's a connection to all that is. And again, now we get dicey with people who have religious trauma. Mm-hmm. And so we might say the connected web of humanity, which in erotic trance state you absolutely feel. What you call it and how you perceive it, again, depends on who you are, where you come from, and why you're doing it.
I love your answer, Barbara, and I love the distinction of it's really conscious sexuality, because
Well, it's a term that most people can hear.
right, but I think that's so important. Is I've heard so many people say, well, I don't really even understand the idea of sacred sexuality because of my Catholic background or blah blah blah. And so
Exactly.
I think it's great that you included that right away. Is it's really about intention and consciousness and presence and mindfulness. I mean, it's such a rich and deep topic. We could talk about just that definition
Exactly.
the entire time. But thank you for giving us that framework to start out with.
I pulled a quote. You had kind of tipped me off. You might want to ask me that question. So I pulled a quote I think you might like. It's by George Fierstein, the author. He writes a huge amount about yoga and has a couple of wonderful books out about Tantra. And Fierstein says, when we truly understand our sexuality, we come face to face with the mystery of the spirit. And when we truly understand the spiritual dimension of existence, we come face to face with the mystery of sexuality. And I like that yin yang. That speaks to me, that quote. Perhaps it does to some of the people listening too.
Thank you. I love that. And it's so true that whichever dimension we are putting our presence and our focus expands us into another one.
Exactly.
And both enhances our understanding of self and our relationship to the oneness. And it's like that is the playground of sexuality. That's the opportunity of sexuality.
Opportunity, I like that. Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you another question. What led you to become who you are in the world of sacred sexuality? I cannot wait to hear this story.
It's like, who am I? Tell me, please. What led me? Well, the simple answer is the AIDS crisis. Back in the 80s, I was working on Broadway as a general manager, and everyone started dying, getting sick and dying.
Yeah.
And by the late 80s, it was really bad. By the early 90s, it got even worse. In the late 80s, I went to a support group for people with AIDS and the people who loved them. And it was the New York version of Louise Hay's Hayride in Los Angeles, which was a very famous support group in the day. And there I met the people who have become my chosen family, Annie Sprinkle and Joseph Kramer. Joseph is the founder of Sexological Bodywork. Annie Sprinkle is the renowned performance artist and former porn star and performance artist. And our big questions in the day were, how can we all, because this is a group of gay men that we're in primarily, how can we all have safer sex that is as hot as the sex we were all having on drugs in the most exquisite dance clubs on the planet in the 70s and early 80s? How can we top that but do it safely? Because if we only create boring, safer sex, no one's going to do it and the plague is going to spread. Is there a kind of sex that has a healing component because so many people were ill? And lastly, is there a kind of safer sex that has a spiritual dimension? Because at the time, people with AIDS were being told that this was God's punishment against a sinful mob of gay men. And so people's ties to their previous spiritual paths had been pretty much severed. So Joseph had started exploring Taoist sexuality, which is a branch of Chinese medicine. He was also a breathwork person and a massage therapist. Annie and I, since Joe was covering the Taoist end, went exploring Tantra. And we would learn something about how to move. We started practicing Tantra, and the physical exercises of Tantra, which are yoga-based, were making us so high that we knew we were onto something. We'd bring them back to the New York Healing Circle, our support group, and we would try them. To do that, we had to modify them because, for instance, we went to a chanting workshop ceremony, whatever. And we got high as a kite on chanting chakra sounds.
Mm-hmm.
This was not necessarily going to fly so well in the gay man group. So we created a chakra sound workshop that was with sex sounds, which was deeply happy making. It made everybody laugh. It made everybody high. And so we kept saying, okay, how can we bring this, what we're learning, into the 20th century at the time? And those were absolutely the roots of urban tantra. How do we take a tantric practice and make it relevant, doable, appealing, and have the safer sex, healing, and spiritual dimension? Then, because we were working with a marginalized community, I was seeing that the workshops I was learning Tantra in were primarily new age, white, middle-aged, middle class, workshop junkies from Marin County, California, just to give you an archetype. And I was like, wow, my people don't fit here at all. What about all the other people who would love this, who would benefit from this practice, who are obviously not welcome in the arena, particularly queer people, gay people at the time, because Annie and I would go as a couple to get the couple's discount to these workshops. And we would also want to work together because we were queer anyway, and we wanted to compare notes. We were doing this for a reason other than just our own pleasure and benefit.
Right.
And consistently the workshop leaders would try to split us up. Let's find men for you. We don't want to work with anybody else. Oh, but it won't work that way. The divine masculine and divine feminine won't be balanced. And I'm like, fuck this shit. Because it is working right here.
I mean, that's so archaic, the idea that we don't have the masculine and feminine within ourselves.
Thank you. And so that was the first, over the years, urban tantra has busted a lot of tantric myths, but I would say that was the first one.
I love that. And I want to say something though, take a pause here, because honestly, I think the short answer is what led you to become who you are in the world of sexuality. This makes me want to cry too, is because that's who you are. This is your mission. You were made to do it. You walked into that group and you didn't just say, oh, I love all these people, I'm going to give them lots of hugs and blah, blah, blah. You said, what can I do about it? How can I use the gifts that the universe gave me to make a difference in this marginalized population, and in the world? I mean, that's who you are. That's why I fell in love with you immediately when I saw your website, is because that's who you are. That's why you took this on. And
you too. I mean, look at your intro to yourself at the top of this segment. I am deeply sorry about the hideous things that happened to you in the 60s and 70s. And now you're a therapist, and now you're moving into healing in this direction. I think the universe hands us a core defining experience. Like for my dad, it was the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. That completely shaped who he became. Yeah. And I think the AIDS crisis did that for me.
Yeah. And I just love it though, how you took that on. And I wanted to stop and say that because, just like you said, I had mine, your dad had his, and everyone who's watching this has theirs.
Exactly.
And they get to evaluate from watching this interview, they get to evaluate, is that defining moment catapulting them to the sacred sexuality and the life they want, or is it limiting them? And, for you said, this is what I want to do. And it was so in alignment, you found it so young, relatively, so in alignment with who you are and your passion in life. And then you found a way to, to help probably millions of other people by this time.
And as I say to the people in my Urban Tantra professional training program, which is a certification program for sexuality professionals of all stripes, is chances are, if you found this program, you're a wounded healer. And we often, our greatest gift often stems from our deepest wound. And so as we help others, we heal ourselves. Yeah, it just, or at least that's how it works in my world.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's of course the same exact thing for me. And I think it's interesting in our society, and I feel like this really does deeply relate to how to develop more intimacy in order to have sacred sexuality. Is we are not taught to really examine and explore and dive into the traumas in our lives. It's starting to be more quote unquote trendy or whatever lately, but in general we are taught to just stuff them. Oh, that happened in the past, that's not affecting me now. And as you said, usually our passion and mission really relates to that.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing that comes from that deep exploration.
Couldn't agree more.
So I don't know if you want to say more about, I mean, obviously you developed Urban Tantra from all of this, noticing that the queer and gay and LGBTQ and all of that whole marginalized world of people who had AIDS was being set aside and shunned, and you obviously embraced that and took that on and did something about it. But you've expanded so far beyond that.
But yet I think it's grown about the same way it started, in that in thinking about this chat we were going to have, I was realizing that Urban Tantra has largely, because it's now an international organization, loosely tied organization, community for sure. Urban Tantra community has largely been a co-created effort. Particularly now with my Urban Tantra professional training program, there are several hundred people all over the world who continually contribute to more and more inclusion. And we listen a lot to each new group or person or bit of diversity that enters our sphere, because it teaches us so much about connection and about intimacy, and about how there are some people we find it very easy to be intimate with. And I don't just mean physically and sexually. And then there are other people who feel foreign or scary or just, more than I can take on. And the more we stretch ourselves, the more, well, first of all, there's peace and love in the world, but also the more bits and parts of ourselves we can own, because the way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Yes.
And whatever happens, whether you start with a passion for helping others or a passion for healing yourself, the way you do everything, anything is the way you do everything.
I was going to ask you that as the next question, but you touched on it already, is how does the inclusivity and welcoming of diversity on all levels support everyone, not just marginalized communities, but how does that, the skills that it takes to be that inclusive and mind bending, how does that help people who think of themselves as, in the mainstream?
That's a great question. I think we need to remember that sexuality is like one of the biggest ways we have sought to keep people separate. You can't do that. You're weird. You're a pervert. That's wrong. You're going to go to hell for that. Sexuality, because it is so powerful, and even if you just begin walking a path in conscious sexuality, excuse me, whichever path you choose, you find that, I'm sorry, Helen, we're going to have to edit this and we're going to have to break here for 1 second.
No worries.
So sexuality has been one of the ways that the dominant culture, whatever it was, whether that's been religion or government, has sought to keep people powerless. Anybody who has experimented even just a little with conscious sexuality understands that it reveals to you that you are so much more powerful than you thought you were. And people have, governments and institutions have wanted to keep people less powerful so they could have some control over them. And if people are completely sexually empowered, there's virtually nothing they can't do. And they will also have the passion to do it. This is dangerous. So people have been shamed, persecuted, killed in many cases for expressing a sexuality that didn't fit some narrow definition that was popular at the time. The people who have been most persecuted for that have been people who appeared other in their expression of sexuality, in their gender expression. We all know this. We all know this. I created Urban Tantra because I feel very uncomfortable when everybody in the room I'm in, or the city or the town, looks the same and is saying the same thing. I get really, really scared. And I don't care whether it's, you know, what kind of homogenous group it is. It just makes me nervous. Even if I kind of agree with them, if there is no one who is different, I'm uncomfortable. So I called it Urban Tantra. I debated whether to use the Tantra word because A, people don't know what it is, B, was it appropriative? But at the time, the people I was talking to, queer people, outsiders, people of color, people of different size, people of different abilities, were curious about Tantra, but they didn't think it was a world that they could walk into. So I used the word Tantra so that they would know, oh, that's a kind of Tantra, a different kind. And I basically wrote Urban Tantra so that I could find more people to play with on some level. Mm-hmm. And it worked. And it worked.
Obviously.
It's become an umbrella that so many people feel comfortable with. And I wasn't interested in just creating queer Tantra. That was not, that would be the same homogeneous, you know.
Exactly.
I wanted a room in which everybody could feel comfortable to be who they are and see what happened. And I remember the first time it happened. It was in London many years ago. And it wasn't a large group, but there was like a kinky couple and a new age couple and a corporate couple and a lesbian couple and a gay couple and a queer, genderqueer couple. And it was like, oh, we've done it.
My people.
It was so exciting. And no one's freaked out. No one's running out of the room. Nobody's behaving inappropriately. We're just weaving this erotic web we didn't have to play or be turned on by anybody else. But the energy in that room was so sweet. And when it was over, people were like, I have never been in a room, said the gay male couple. I've never been in a room with women making sex sounds. That was kind of sexy. And everybody had a little bit of, oh my God, it was okay to do this in a group where we weren't all the same. Because it felt like we were all the same.
Because we are. I mean,
thank you.
Because we are. You know, two things I want to comment on. One is I think it's so brilliant to name it Urban Tantra, because what do we think of when we think of urban? We think of tons of people all together and all different diversities. I mean, that's what urban is. And so,
something that moves quite rather quickly, and is kind of driven.
And lots of high energy.
And, you know, a lot of the people who told me, oh, I don't have time for Tantra, had, you know, read the National Enquirer bit about Sting's 8-hour Tantra experiences. And those of us who practice Tantra knew what he meant. But everybody else is like, well, I don't even have time for that. So I wanted also a practice of Tantra that felt accessible, that you could do in the time you had.
Absolutely. I love that. And the other thing I wanted to comment on is that the energy you're talking about in that diverse group in London, and the permission that it gives each and every person when they see and are open-minded about the diversity and the inclusivity. It's like, oh, if I can embrace them in the oneness, then I must be okay too, in that I like to fantasize about this, or I like to be touched like that. And it's so true. I mean, I can't imagine how you can feel completely liberated if we don't liberate everyone.
Yeah. Louise Hay had a talk in the late 80s, 88, 89. And the metaphysical author and teacher, I'm sure a piece of this audience knows her work pretty well. And it was called The Totality of Possibilities. And that has become a cornerstone of my work, that phrase and that concept, the totality of possibilities. The totality of possibilities is the number of possibilities there actually are versus the limited set of possibilities. I think of it as a low ceiling that we traditionally think of, that are things that are possible for us. We have this ceiling here, like only so much is possible. Mm-hmm. And with some spiritual work or some whatever work, therapy, the ceiling can get a bit higher. Techniques like the breath and energy orgasm, which I teach all over the world, and I now have an MP3, I'll give you the link for that later. You lie down or most people lie down, you lie down and you breathe. And you breathe up your body. You breathe yourself into the closest thing we use to describe it is a full body orgasmic state. When you come out on the other side, and then followed by a period of meditation, when you come out on the other side of that experience, the ceiling on your possibilities has gone up several feet to a couple of miles. When you realize that you can breathe yourself into an orgasm, you realize that there's a whole lot more in the universe that you didn't know was possible.
You know,
on some level, all I do in the world is give people possibilities and permission to follow those possibilities. That's all I do.
That's all?
Yeah.
I mean, are you kidding me?
It reduces down to that.
I know, but it's like all I do is open the door to everything you ever wanted. That's all I do.
But it's just because I found a door. You still have to be willing to walk through it.
Exactly. You know, I just started going to breath work every week with my daughter and her fiance and a couple of other family members. And I just took to it like a duck to water. Oh my God.
Isn't it amazing?
I love it. And that all over orgasm that you're talking about, you know, your body tingles and contracts, and, you know, your spirit just expands. And it's like all these incredible experiences that are there. They're just there for the taking. And people don't know about them or don't want to do them or whatever it is. I don't know. It's shocking.
It takes you to an altered state of consciousness. Yeah. I've had breathwork experiences that are far better than any psychedelic that I've tried. I don't have huge experience in psychedelics, but enough to know that, wow, breath and erotic energy will take you to the same place. And there are people who it would be interesting for you to find one and interview them. There are people who do combine sacred sexuality with psychedelics. They would be fascinating to speak to.
They would be. If you know anybody, I'd love to hear about it. I want to ask you something, though. You triggered my mind back to that you said earlier. The use of the word high, that you get high. I'd like you to talk about that and how it relates to consciousness, because I don't want to have the audience misinterpret that and use it as, I don't want to get high. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not, blah, blah, blah.
It's let's call it a spiritual high, or hang on, I know what we'll do. Let's look at the difference between pleasure and ecstasy. And this isn't, I'm not creating a false binary. I'm just going to play with this concept. Pleasure. Yeah. When we think of pleasure, what do we think of? We think of delight, joy, maybe comfort, nourishment, tingling. What else? What else goes with pleasure? Yummy. Filling your own gaps there. Pleasure, right? Touch, maybe kissing. Pleasure feels wonderful. Yeah, okay. Then we have ecstasy. What's an ecstatic experience? Well, to me, an ecstatic experience is one that leaves you transformed in some way. An ecstatic experience might be extremely pleasurable, but it also might pick you up by the ankles, turn you upside down, shake you around, then put you back on your feet and say, okay, now how do you feel? You might have a crygasm or a gigglegasm or an angergasm in the course of an ecstatic experience. Meaning, have you ever laughed so hard that you thought you might die from laughter? But when you finally took that breath and realized you weren't going to die, you felt cleansed and high and delightful. And same with crygasms, even angergasms. They're sort of spontaneous, intense emotional expressions that really aren't about anything. They're just the body releasing the emotion. And that often happens in the middle of an ecstatic experience. Mm-hmm. When you finish an ecstatic experience, you come out with your totality of possibilities sky high, empty, ready to start again, ready to see the world with clearer eyes. You don't need an ecstatic experience every time you have sex. You don't need an ecstatic experience once a week. Most people don't.
I want one, though.
But you could. But when they happen, you go, oh my God, I was longing for this. I just didn't know it. And that's, when we say high, we, again, as you said, it's not high for high's sake. It's a deeply expansive, healing, visionary experience. And that experience could be just quiet bliss. I remember we were doing, it was a dance. It was a very intense breath work kind of 3-hour dance, and with lots of sound and intensity. And I remember about 200 people. And I remember I sat down in the middle of the space toward the end and just started meditating after all that energy raising and breath work, and went to this space where I was in the space, but like in a little room with clear glass walls. I was still in the space. And in the middle of that little room was absolute bliss, perfect peace, complete clarity. I had this idiot grin on my face that I could not take off. And I stayed there for like 45 minutes. To this day, I can now go into that place in the middle of any kind of chaos if I take a few breaths and take myself back there. So, is that high? Okay, maybe it is. I'll take it. But it doesn't have to be loud and screamy and out of control. In fact, it can feel like coming home to the true self. And orgasmic experiences, whether achieved through genital stimulation, breath, or a combination of both, can take you to these exquisite, sacred, here's that word again, places.
I love that. And, you know, the distinction that I really appreciate is it's not just a description of the experience, but it's how you choose to use it.
Yeah.
That, you know, I think in our society, we associate getting high with an escape from reality and then a crash back to reality. And there's really no purpose to the high. There's no integration of it. There's no propelling yourself forward from it.
Well said.
And in what you're saying, it's absolutely propelling you forward, and it integrates you into another level of reality rather than taking you away from it.
Exactly. Oh, here's another one you'll love because of what you just said. My late teaching partner, Chester, used to make a distinction between ejection of consciousness and injection of consciousness. Let me tell you what I mean. He'd speak about the Taoist principle of the inner flute and how in some practices, you would essentially move energy up the body to eject consciousness so your consciousness would join cosmic consciousness, something that feels like above and outside. And Chester suggested we experiment with doing the reverse, which is injection of consciousness, injecting that same energy and intention inward into our deepest selves. He said even the most advanced esoteric sex positive cultures have had their bouts with body negativity, which is to say, let's get out of these dirty old meat suits and go to God. Where Chester was saying, let's dive deeper into these precious temples and discover what is inside. So I encourage people who, especially those who are just beginning the sacred sexuality route, not to fall prey to the tendency toward taking on unconscious body negativity.
I love that because we are in human form for a reason, you know, and if we don't feel our divinity in ourselves, then it's always a desire to escape it, you know, to escape the reality rather than enhance our reality.
People are starting to use psychedelics in exactly that way now, not as escape drugs, but rather I want to know myself and my universe better drugs.
Absolutely. You know, I believe that's going to be a real powerful adjunct to all the other powerful tools that we have, and not marginalizing that either.
Do you know that it was when LSD became illegal that Stanislav Grof developed a practice of holotropic breath work because he was using psychedelics to help people in therapy. And when that was no longer permissible, he had to look for something else that had a similar effect to help people release trauma. And he came up with holotropic breath work. And I really encourage people to check out, just look up holotropic, HOLO, tropic breath work. And there are workshops all over the world, I believe. Yeah. And if you're into breath work or think you might be into breath work, I heartily recommend holotropic breath work. But you can start with my breath and energy orgasm, which you can do at home in 30 minutes.
Exactly. Don't wait. Don't wait for that. That was my first introduction to it, was holotropic breath work.
Amazing.
Back in the, I don't know, late 80s, probably. Okay, so I want to keep this succinct, and I want to ask you one more question, though, is what is your perspective about dealing with underlying issues that block sacred sexuality, such as trauma, mistaken beliefs, fear, repression from the church? I mean, you've alluded to that, but I'd like you to just address that directly, because I think it's just so prevalent.
What I've learned from my professional training program colleagues, especially because we try to work with maximum diversity where we can, is that we have to be really culturally aware. You don't want to crash into someone's deeply held beliefs in a way that further traumatizes them. Permission and possibilities. As a fast answer, I want to go back to that. What does the person need or want permission to do? And what do they think their possibilities are? And if you can go just like one step further, or help, if you can imagine what one step further might be, and maybe suggest going a step further. Permission and possibilities is the secret, but it's going to look different depending on the trauma, depending on the religious background, depending on the cultural background, depending on the economic background. So that's where I start. What do you need permission to do that you're not doing? What do you think your possibilities are? What do you think your impossibilities are? And my other question that I always start with, why do you do sex? What's the big payoff? Or if they're not doing sex, why did you, or why do you think you want to? And get to the core value they place around sex. Some people may say, I do it to become I want to be close to my partner, connection with a partner. And somebody else might say, it's connection to God, Goddess, all that is. It's connection to my true nature. It's connection to nature in general. It's almost always connection. But what people wish to be connected to as the big payoff differs. And when you know that, it's easier to help them find a path. Because, or solve relationship problems. If you have one person who likes to be connected to their partner and one person who likes to be connected to God, Goddess, all that is, they're going to have a hard time connecting. The person who wants to be connected to the goddess is going to feel held back. The person who wants to be connected to their partner is going to feel abandoned.
Right.
So those are just some simple ways in that sort of apply to everything. But obviously, it's, I come from the school that has taught me whatever works, so long as it's consensual.
I appreciate that. And I really like what you're saying about bring it down to some simple commonalities. Let's go for understanding beyond, because sometimes I think, oh, I'm traumatized, so therefore I can't do this, or I have limiting beliefs, so I can't do this. And it's like, let's bring it down to the essence of it, of what is it that you're looking for? Because, one of my other speakers said it this way, that, we've all been oppressed. Everyone. Men are oppressed from expressing their feminine side. Women are oppressed from their power and sexuality. I mean, it's like, we've all been oppressed in one way or another. And shamed.
The other biggie is shame reduction. Whatever you can do to reduce shame will help. Shame reduction and permission go together quite well. That will, where you can reduce shame, you increase possibilities.
Absolutely. I mean, we could talk about that all day long.
That's a whole telesummit series in itself.
Yeah, that was my last telesummit. Actually, was about healing, releasing shame.
Right. Yeah. That's huge. That's super important.
Yeah, like you said, though, it's a whole other topic, but it's certainly included here.
Definitely.
So what would you like to say as a summary statement, Barbara, to the audience, if you want to leave them with one?
If chances are, if you're watching this telesummit, you're either a practitioner of conscious sexuality or it has really piqued your interest. And I just suggest you start anywhere that seems delightful. Apply the conscious sexuality principle to any place in your life or any place in your erotic life where it feels easy and delightful. Two thoughts just went and collided like this. My friend Joseph Kramer, whom I mentioned earlier, even has in his orgasmic yoga series, which you can find through my online classes on my website. He has even conscious porn watching. It's even possible to turn porn into conscious sexuality. So some people might want to start right there. Again, go to the online classes tab on my website and you'll see them. So start where you're at and pick the thing that sounds the most delightful and offers the most fun.
I love that. And because start where you are. I mean, it's like, don't wait until you're here or, thinner or even older. Yes. or coupled even.
Do not wait till you lose the weight. It's not about fitting into a bikini.
No, but it's wherever you are. And that's such a reinforcement that we are already lovable, that we're already part of that oneness, that we're already part of the sacred sexuality of the universe. We just get to find what you were saying before, find that door.
Exactly.
I love that. So thank you so much. And please tell us about your free gift and about how to, I know we've talked about urbantantra.com over and over and over, but is there any other place that you'd like to encourage people to connect with you?
Yeah, barbaracarrellas.com. They're really the same site, so either one will work. The breath and energy orgasm that I keep telling you about is if you go to urbantantra.com or barbaracarrellas.com and look under books and MP3s, you'll see a link to the breath and energy orgasm meditation. It's about 30 minutes long. You can do it at home. I offer workshops in it if you want to come to one of those. But really, just get the MP3. You can do it whenever you want. And my free gift for this telesummit is access to a webinar we did a little while back called Tantra, Kink, and Consciousness. And it's a webinar where I explain how whatever kind of your sexuality you find appealing, in this case, I was talking about kink, BDSM, can be done in a tantric manner, whether you want to call it tantric kink or kinky tantra. You don't have to give up turn-ons you currently have in order to do conscious or sacred sexuality. They can be folded into the practice. It's just the way you do them and what you get out of them will change. But you can still be turned on by whatever you're turned on by. Tantra, Kink, and Consciousness.
Well, thank you. I in my last summit, it blew my mind open about BDSM. I had always thought, that's a little outside of sacred sexuality, but I got really challenged to say, no, not true.
Not true.
It's all about bringing consciousness in.
Precisely. So I think whether you're deeply into kink or not at all, I think you still might find Tantra, Kink, and Consciousness a very interesting webinar.
Absolutely. I am definitely going to watch it myself. So, Barbara, just can't thank you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to offer us your wisdom, your warmth, your humor, all of the things that you've given to me and to our audience today. And I really want to thank you for that and for the incredible work that you have done for 45 years and will continue to do.
Has it been that long? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. You said it was in the 80s. 35 years, I guess.
35,
That's 35 years, yeah. I'm sure you were doing it before, but anyway, 35 years. Anyway, thank you so much for all you do and for being here today. I really
thank you.